Ridley Scott's latest great movie is out today, and it's on Napoleon. And I thought that instead of doing a review of the movie, I would tell you how Napoleon, who was not meant to have any power really, when we look at his, at his background, when we look at his life, how did he rise to power? This is a what the hell happened in history. How come someone like him became Emperor of France? How someone like him conquered so many territories in Europe and beyond. He's one of the most known figures of the 18th century. He changed France forever and conquered many lands in Europe and beyond. The incredible fact about Napoleon is that he has more documented victories than any other battlefield commanders. And for that, it means that we can assess his victories, but also that we can look at his rise to power. He has truly marked French, European, and even world history. He's often compared to other leaders such as Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great, for Napoleon too was a true conqueror at heart. What is fascinating with Napoleon is that he was genuinely loved and respected by his men, probably because he fought with them on the battlefield, because also of his background as a soldier himself. From a minor gentry family in Corsica to Emperor of France, the rise to power for Napoleon is quite an astonishing story. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on the 15th of August 1769 on the island of Corsica, who had just been conquered by the French. His family was of Italian origins, and his father was called Carlo Bonaparte, and his mother was Maria Letizia Romolina. Carlo Bonaparte was not, however, a real role model for his family. He had many children, which means Napoleon had many siblings. He gambled a lot and left the family with incredible debts. He was also at first a true nationalist and believed that Corsica should be free, and he fought the French. He wanted Corsica to be independent. But then he was also an opportunist, because he realized that it was almost not useful to be like this, and he would change side and became a collaborator of the French army, of the French government. And that was going to put Napoleon in a difficult situation at the time, because of his own beliefs, but in the end it would also move Napoleon into the right direction of moving his interest to France. Napoleon was sent to France to become a military officer and learned about how artillery worked, something that the aristocrats were not really interested in. Soon his ambition would grow, but he faced so many obstacles. It is pretty clear that someone like him, from a humble background, would be prevented to achieve greatness. Little did he know that the French Revolution would create a momentum for him to achieve his real ambition of rising to power. The French Revolution was going to be a trigger in Napoleon's life. By the time in early 1780s, being unhappy in the army, he decided to return to Corsica and believe in its independence. But he's not welcomed by Paoli, the Corsican independent leader, because Paoli thinks that all Bonapartes are collaborators of France. In Napoleon, is a turning moment for his life. He realized that if he wants to achieve great things, it's not going to be in Corsica. So he goes back to France. What Napoleon needed from his background was a shake of the hierarchy, and this is exactly what the French Revolution is going to provide. While the country fell into, terror and almost a civil war between the Jacobins and the Royalists and the Girondins, like there were different types of factions, but the Jacobins were led by Maximilien Robespierre. Napoleon chose at that time to support the Jacobins, to support the radicals, and in 1793 he wrote a letter to them. As a result, he was given the leadership of the Jacobin forces in Toulon, and that was the first opportunity of a lifetime for Napoleon. Toulon was a strategic place and port of France on the Mediterranean, and it was very important for the Jacobins, for the French revolutionaries, to secure that port from any enemies, the Austrians, the British, anyone that could come and attack France from the south, because they had armies, they had put their vessels there. So that was a very important mission. This is one of the scenes that we see in the trailer of Ridley Scott's movie. France is still full of royalists at the time, and Toulon really needed to be secured by the Jacobins. It was the great opportunity for Napoleon to show his military genius, and he did so. Thanks to the strategy he's going to put forward, the Republicans won, and this marked the first great victory of Napoleon Bonaparte. He became Brigadier General. Yet things were far from being, resolved in the revolutionary France. And people started rising against the Jacobins, against the radicals. The situation for Napoleon is far from being easy, and he tried to pretend that he's no longer associated with the Jacobins. But his own letters with Robespierre's brother means that he's dragged into the downfall of the Jacobins. His life is not at risk, but his career is put on hold for a while. The situation in France remained chaotic for many years, with incredible divisions among the people. Paul Barras became the leader of the Directory from 1795 to 1799. And Napoleon is going to show how useful he could be for Barras' ambition. Napoleon gained Barras' trust and fought against the royalists who attempted some plots to remove Barras and the Directory from power. He took his mission seriously and won against the royalists once more. He became a household name, and he was in great favour of Barras. This is also where he met Josephine de Beauharnais, who was very close to Barras as well. So through Josephine, whom he probably loved, he became very close to the top of the government, and their new ambitions were going to form in his head, but also new opportunities were going to be available for him. He married Josephine on the 9th March 1796. She was a widow and had lost her husband during the Reign of Terror. She's older than Napoleon, but she's elegant, charming, and understands the new regime really well. Napoleon is named Commanding General of the Italy Army and was given his first campaign. And that was key for Napoleon to show the man he was, the military man he was, the military leader he was. He's leading 20 to 30,000 men who had been neglected by the government, and he appears as their great savior and promised them great victories, but also wealth and glory as a result. They were fighting the Austrian Empire and army. Napoleon launches offensives and was always unpredictable. He really had a sense on when to advance and when to retreat. He was confusing his enemies. From 1796 to 97, he constantly outmaneuvered the Austrians, and he gained more and more territory in Italy. His victories are known by everyone, and his name became a symbol of military glory. By autumn 1797, the Austrians conceded to Napoleon, and this is Napoleon's great victory, but also his men who believed and adored him. He was fighting with his men, but he was also providing victory after victory. There is a sense of trust between his men and Napoleon. Napoleon there shows pragmatism and trades with Australians. He gave them Venice for the territories that would be more beneficial for France. He displayed his leadership skills and acted as a leader of France. Paris doesn't know what he's doing. Forces the Paris government to agree any deal he made with the Austrians. This is the beginning of Napoleon's display of true ambitions. He wants to rule, not just as a military leader, but as a political leader. He acts almost as a king. But for the next few years, Napoleon is still careful not to show his true colors yet, to show his true ambition yet. He showed great humility when he returns to Paris. He shows that he's done this for Barras, he's done this for the Directory, he's done this for France. Really, he did it for himself. When he returned to Paris in late 1797, he's a hero. Now he had his eye on the British and wanted to show that he could also defeat them. Instead of confronting them directly, he chose to look to the Levant to find some strategic advantage. In 1798, he convinced the politicians in Paris to take over Egypt, which would give an advantage to the French in that part of the world, looking for greatness and glory. The scene in the trailer of Ridley Scott movie where he fires at pyramids, it's absolutely ridiculous. Napoleon would have never made such a mistake. So that is one of the part of the trailer that was quite ridiculous and a bit funny. also show that Ridley Scott really wanted to show Napoleon's greatness on screen, because he really shows the military campaigns of Napoleon, all these great victory, Toulon. And Egypt is actually not that much of a great victory, but the idea of it was far from being stupid. The British would not let that conquest undisputed, and Admiral Horatio Nelson destroyed the French fleet on the Nile. Napoleon did not see that one coming. He soon went on the offensive and fought back the British, but what he didn't expect as well was the British had made an alliance with the Ottomans. Now the Ottomans were attacking on lands in the east, the French. The French failed to push back the Ottomans. And then there's a controversial episode here. The French were still going to make some Ottomans prisoners. And Napoleon here was going to show his true cruelty. He goes a bit beyond, in terms of it's difficult to talk if there's like a code of, of war or something. But he's going to massacre all the Ottomans prisoners. And that remains a main controversial point in Napoleon's rise to power. The occupation of Egypt under the French, the very short one before the British and the Ottomans take over, is actually very complicated because it is disastrous for the population, and apparently the Napoleonic army loot and physically abuse the population there. At the same time, we have rumors that he can cure the plague just by touching, like this painting that shows, him touching that person and not being afraid of plague itself. Plague was still raging at that time. For some, he's a monster. For others, he's a healer and a hero. Napoleon is a controversial figure. The Egyptian campaign was a failure, and Napoleon knew that he had to make some damage control to his reputation if he wanted to continue to succeed. He made the decision to leave his army behind in Egypt and leave for Paris with his closest associates before the government in Paris found out about the failure in Egypt. When he arrived back in 1799, he's lying to them, saying that everything is going well in Egypt. The situation for France is complicated. They have many enemies: the British, the Ottomans, the Russians, the Austrians. In 1799, there's still chaos, and people are tired of that chaos. The Directory seems to be imploding, and Napoleon is going to seize the opportunity of a lifetime, thanks to his reputation as a military hero. A coup d'etat is organized, and it becomes clear that they need a military leader. Napoleon positions himself as such, and despite few support from the parliamentarians, he is supported by his brother Lucien Bonaparte, who's a good orator and kind of a politician himself, and obviously from his soldiers, his army. They attacked the legislators, forcing them to leave the parliament, and they took over. Overall, the French people welcomed his regime as they needed security, and the 1790s had been marked by instability, rise of thieves and banditry. The army seems to be the only way to put an end to it and restore law and order. They believed that an authoritarian regime like the Napoleon one would work. He would restore the legal and judicial systems. In Napoleon's first council, he implemented a new judicial structure centralized in Paris, and the judges were appointed by the Minister of Justice, who was in Paris. So everything was controlled from Paris and from Napoleon. He worked with the papacy to restore a collaborative relationship between Rome and France, without having to give back the Catholic Church any of its money. He even tricked the Catholic Church by signing a document and then adding some bits at the end that the Catholic Church had no idea they were giving. The Napoleonic regime is conservative, and there is the restoration of old institutions that help preserve France's stability in the past. But that also meant that Napoleon went back on everything about the abolition of slavery, equal rights. The people who had to pay the price were the women, who literally had no longer civil rights under Napoleon. The father was in control of all the women in his house. He was in control of the children's education, he was in control of where the wife would live, and he could even force a wife to accept a mistress to live with them under their house, under their roof. It is a very hard time for women during Napoleon. Napoleon was the leader of France, but there were still foreign threats. The Austrians, the British. Austria had made an offensive in northern Italy and reconquered some of its territories. Napoleon needed to act swiftly and decisively. And it's when he decided to go through the Alps to surprise the Austrians, and it worked. He caught them by surprise, and there's the Battle of Marengo. And at first it's a disaster for Napoleon, but soon, thanks to his men and General de Say, who died in battle, he's going to win over the Austrian army. And that's a very important victory, because Napoleon now discusses peace and forces even the British to come to the table. It is the Peace of Amiens that is agreed in late 1801 and will be signed in 1802. Napoleon appears as a peacemaker. He just needs some time to stabilize things in France before showing his other true ambitions. He made himself consul for life, but it's not enough. And after, he made himself emperor. Napoleon crowned himself and crowned his wife Josephine as empress on the 2nd December 1804 in Notre-Dame de Paris. Within 10 years, Napoleon came from being a nobody, a military soldier, to being the emperor of France. And his rise is not going to stop there. Now that he brought stability to France, he's going to want to conquer more territories. But here we are at the point where Napoleon is at his greatest. I hope you enjoyed that video that explains how Napoleon rose to power, and that it will give you an understanding of the new Ridley Scott movie on Napoleon. Thank you so much for watching What the Hell in History video, and I hope to see you next time in my other videos. Bye!